I never imagined that a simple package delivery would change my life forever. At 59, I thought my days of excitement were long behind me, until that young delivery boy, Anthony, crashed his bike in front of my house. Helping him inside, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in decades. Little did I know, that moment would lead to something I could never have anticipated. I had always believed my life was steady and predictable. At 59, I lived alone in a cozy suburban home, surrounded by quiet neighbors and empty routines. My mornings started the same. A cup of coffee by the window, watching the world pass by, longing for something I couldn't quite name. I took pride in taking care of myself, regular workouts, healthy meals, and little touches to keep my appearance lively. But no amount of effort could fill the void that crept into my days. Widowed for nearly a decade, I had spent my time pouring into hobbies, books, and the occasional visit with friends. People often said I radiated confidence and strength, but inside, there was a deep loneliness I never spoke about. I missed the warmth of companionship, the feeling of being truly seen. Anthony, the delivery boy, was a spark of life I hadn't expected. He was 23, full of youthful energy, and charming in an unintentional way. For months, I found myself ordering packages just to see him. Books, decorations, even things I didn't need. It was worth it to hear the doorbell and see his easy smile. I told myself it was harmless, just a small indulgence to brighten my days. But the truth was, every time I saw Anthony, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A pull. A longing. I knew it was wrong, but my heart seemed to betray me. I caught myself looking forward to those fleeting moments when he'd stand on my porch, exchanging polite greetings, his warm voice lingering in my mind long after he left. That ordinary day turned extraordinary when I saw him fall off his motorbike outside my home. My heart skipped a beat as I rushed to help him. His scraped knee and elbow were minor, but the look on his face, so vulnerable yet composed, shook me in ways I couldn't explain. Helping him inside, tending to his wounds, I couldn't deny the electricity in the air. It was as though the emptiness I'd carried for so long had started to fade. In that moment, I felt alive again, but I also knew I was stepping onto dangerous ground. After that day, something shifted inside me. Anthony's presence lingered in my thoughts, and I found myself looking out the window more often, hoping to catch a glimpse of him as he made his deliveries. Each time he stopped by, it felt as though the world grew brighter, even if just for a moment. But along with that excitement came guilt, a nagging voice in my head that told me these feelings were inappropriate, absurd even. Still, I couldn't ignore the signs. He started staying longer than necessary, chatting with me about his day, his struggles, and his dreams. I learned that he was living in a cramped apartment far from work, struggling to make ends meet. His openness surprised me. It was rare for someone so young to be so candid. And yet there was a warmth in his eyes, a sincerity that made me feel safe. One evening, as I stood by the kitchen preparing dinner, I heard the familiar hum of his motorbike. My heart raced, even though I knew it was ridiculous to feel this way. When I opened the door, he stood there holding a package, his usual smile replaced by an unfamiliar tension. "Judith," he said softly, handing me the box. I just wanted to say thank you for helping me the other day. Not everyone would have done that." I brushed it off with a smile, trying to keep things light. "It was nothing, Anthony. Anyone would have done the same." But he shook his head, his gaze lingering on me. "Not everyone," he said. His words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. I felt a flutter in my chest, a dangerous mix of excitement and uncertainty. Over the next few weeks, his visits became more frequent, and the tension between us grew harder to ignore. I noticed the way his eyes lingered when he thought I wasn't looking, the slight hesitation in his voice when he said my name. It was the same tension I felt when he helped me carry a heavy box to my living room, and our hands brushed for just a second too long. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, but deep down I knew better. One afternoon, he arrived earlier than usual. "Judith, I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and serious. "This commute is killing me, and I don't know how much longer I can keep doing it. Finding a place closer would make things so much easier, but everything's too expensive." The words were innocent enough, but something about the way he looked at me as he spoke made my pulse quicken. I hesitated, then blurted out something I hadn't planned. "I have a small apartment next door," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's empty right now. If you'd like, you can move in for a very reasonable price." His eyes widened, and for a moment he didn't say anything. "Judith, that's incredibly kind of you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. But there was something else in his expression, something unspoken that neither of us dared to acknowledge. As he moved in over the next few days, I found myself watching him more than I should have. The way he carried his boxes, his broad shoulders straining under the weight, the easy way he smiled at everyone who passed by. It was mesmerizing. But it was also a reminder of the growing divide between what I knew was right and the feelings I could no longer control. I told myself to keep my distance, to set boundaries, but it was already too late. Every shared glance, every accidental touch only made it harder to ignore the storm brewing between us. And though I tried to push those thoughts away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking straight into something I wasn't prepared for. It began subtly, a lingering glance, a soft smile held for just a second too long. Anthony had been living in the apartment next door for only a week, but the dynamic between us had already shifted. His presence felt magnetic, drawing me in even when I told myself to keep a safe distance. Every evening, he would knock on my door to return something borrowed or ask for advice about a household chore. And every time, I felt the boundaries between us blur a little more. One evening, as I stood by the stove preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. I knew it was Anthony before I even opened it. He stood there with a hesitant smile, holding a broken light bulb. "Judith, do you have a spare? I think I messed up replacing this one." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Come in. I'll take a look." As I retrieved the bulb from the kitchen cabinet, I could feel his eyes on me. There was an intensity in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. "You've been so kind to me," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But when I turned to hand him the bulb, our fingers brushed, and the air between us grew heavy. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Instead, our eyes locked, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. "Judith," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're different. I've never met anyone like you." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My heart raced, and I felt a warmth rise in my cheeks. "You should get that light fixed," I finally said, forcing a smile as I stepped back, trying to regain control of the situation. But the moment lingered, and so did the feelings it stirred in me. The days that followed were no easier. Every interaction with Anthony felt charged, as if we were dancing on the edge of something forbidden. I found myself replaying every word he said, every glance he gave me, wondering if I was imagining the tension, or if he felt it too. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was late, and I was sitting on the porch sipping tea and enjoying the cool breeze. Anthony appeared out of nowhere, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice low and warm. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded, gesturing to the chair beside me. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. But the silence was anything but peaceful. It was thick with unspoken words, with emotions neither of us dared to name. "Judith," he began, breaking the quiet. "Can I be honest with you?" I turned to him, my pulse quickening. "Of course." He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I've been trying to ignore this, to convince myself it's just in my head, but—" He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "I feel something when I'm around you. Something I can't explain." His words sent a jolt through me. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was mistaken, but I couldn't. Because I felt it too. "Anthony," I said softly, my voice trembling. It's not right." "I know," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "But that doesn't change how I feel. You make me feel alive, Judith. Like I'm not just some delivery boy struggling to get by. When I'm with you, I feel like I matter." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as his words sank in. No one had made me feel so seen, so valued in years. "You matter more than you realize," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He reached for my hand, and though I knew I should pull away, I didn't. His touch was gentle but firm, and it sent a wave of warmth through me. "Judith, tell me you feel it too," he said, his voice pleading. I couldn't lie. "I do," I admitted, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "But that doesn't make it any less complicated." He leaned closer, his face just inches from mine. "Some things are worth the risk," he said, his voice a mix of determination and vulnerability. Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was tentative at first, but as I leaned into him, it deepened, fueled by the emotions we had both been holding back for so long. When we finally pulled apart, the reality of what had just happened hit me. My heart raced, my thoughts a whirlwind of guilt and longing. "Anthony," I said, my voice shaky. "We can't do this." "But we already have," he replied, his eyes searching mine. "And I don't think I can stop." Neither could I. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The bouquet of flowers Anthony brought that afternoon was like a spark in a powder keg. As much as I wanted to resist, I couldn't deny the pull between us any longer. I let him in, and for the next few weeks we slipped into a dangerous routine. He'd come over late in the evenings after the world had quieted, and we'd steal moments together. Moments filled with passion, laughter, and the kind of intimacy I hadn't experienced in years. But the secrecy came at a cost. I lived in constant fear of discovery. The neighbors' curious glances, Mrs. Henderson's lingering stares, the way Anthony's presence in my life became harder to hide. It all weighed on me. Every knock at the door, every phone call sent my heart racing. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to end it. Anthony had awakened something in me that I thought was long dead, and giving that up felt impossible. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, his arm draped casually over my shoulder, I voiced my fears. Anthony, whatever we're doing, it's going to come crashing down eventually. People will talk, and I'm not sure I can handle that. He turned to me, his expression serious. Judith, let them talk. None of it matters. What matters is us. But it wasn't that simple, and we both knew it. The age gap, the whispered judgments, the implications, it all loomed over us like a dark cloud. The breaking point came one morning when I was at the grocery store. I could feel the eyes of my neighbors on me, their murmurs just loud enough to catch snippets of their conversation. Have you seen the young man living next door to Judith? Always over at her house. Odd, don't you think? I tried to brush it off, but their words clung to me like a second skin. By the time I got home, I was shaking, the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. When Anthony stopped by that evening, I couldn't hide my distress. They're talking about us, I said, pacing the living room. The neighbors, the whole neighborhood, they're all speculating. I can't do this anymore, Anthony. I can't live like this. He stepped toward me, his hands gently resting on my shoulders. Judith, listen to me. None of them know us. They don't know what we've been through, what we mean to each other. Don't let their gossip dictate your happiness. But it's not just about me. I cried, pulling away. Your life, your reputation, it's at stake too. Do you really want to be the subject of their rumors? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't care about their rumors. I care about you. About us. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at him. Anthony, you don't understand. I've spent my whole life being careful, doing what's expected of me. I don't know how to handle this. His expression softened as he stepped closer, cupping my face in his hands. Then let me help you. We'll face it together. But as much as I wanted to believe him, the doubts refused to fade. That night, after he left, I lay awake, replaying the day's events in my mind. The whispers, the fear, the overwhelming guilt, it all felt like too much to bear. The next morning, I made a decision. When Anthony came by, I met him at the door, my resolve faltering as I looked into his eyes. Anthony, we need to stop, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He frowned, his brows knitting together. What are you talking about? This, whatever we have, it's not sustainable. It's not fair to either of us. Judith, you don't mean that, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. After everything we've been through, you're just going to walk away? I have to, I said, though my heart broke with every word. You deserve someone who can love you without fear or shame. Someone who isn't constantly looking over their shoulder. He shook his head, his frustration evident. You think I care about any of that? You think I want someone else when I've found everything I need in you? Anthony, please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. Don't make this harder than it already is. For a moment he didn't say anything, his jaw tightening as he struggled to process my words. Finally he stepped back, his eyes filled with hurt. If this is what you really want, then I'll go. But don't think for a second that I'll ever forget you. As he walked away, I felt a part of me shatter. I stood there in the doorway, watching him disappear into the distance, knowing I'd just let go of something I might never find again. The days that followed were agonizing. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence a constant reminder of what I'd lost. I tried to convince myself that I'd made the right decision, but the ache in my chest refused to fade. One evening, as I stood by the window, I caught a glimpse of Anthony walking to his motorbike. He paused, looking back at my house for what felt like an eternity before riding away. In that moment, I realized that some scars never truly heal. The days turned into weeks, and Anthony's absence felt like a hollow ache in my chest. The house, once a haven of stolen moments and quiet laughter, now seemed unbearably silent. I threw myself into my old routines, morning coffee by the window, tending to the garden, reading books I couldn't focus on, but nothing felt the same. The spark Anthony had brought into my life was gone, leaving a void I didn't know how to fill. I often thought about him, about his words, and the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I missed the way he made me feel, alive, seen, cherished. But I told myself I had done the right thing. I had saved us both from the judgment of others, from a relationship that would always be shrouded in whispers and disapproval. At least, that's what I tried to believe. One afternoon, as I cleaned out the spare bedroom, I came across something Anthony had left behind. A simple notebook. I opened it hesitantly, my hands trembling. Inside were sketches, notes, and doodles, each one a window into his mind. On the last page, there was a short note written in his handwriting. "Judith, some things are worth the risk." Tears blurred my vision as I traced the words with my fingertips. I realized then that I had let my fear dictate my choices. I had pushed him away because I was too afraid to face the world's judgment, too afraid to let myself be happy. And in doing so, I had lost something precious. But it wasn't just about Anthony. His presence had forced me to confront a deeper truth about myself, that I had spent so many years living for others, conforming to expectations and ignoring my own needs and desires. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself what I truly wanted. The answer wasn't simple, but it was clear. I wanted to live without fear, without regret. That evening, I stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The world felt both vast and impossibly small. I thought about Anthony's words, about the way he had seen me not as a 59-year-old woman clinging to the past, but as someone vibrant, someone capable of love and passion. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose what came next. I resolved to start living for myself, to embrace the risks, the messiness, and the beauty of life. Whether or not Anthony would be a part of that future was uncertain, but his impact on me was undeniable. He had awakened something in me that could never be extinguished. A few days later, I sat down at my desk and wrote him a letter. I didn't know if he'd read it or if it would even reach him, but I needed to say the words I hadn't been brave enough to say before. "Anthony, I let my fears get the better of me. I pushed you away because I was afraid of what the world might think, afraid of stepping outside the lines I've drawn for myself. But the truth is, you made me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in decades. You reminded me of what it means to love, to take risks, to truly live. Thank you for that. Wherever life takes you, I hope you find happiness. You deserve nothing less." I sealed the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure if I'd ever have the courage to send it. But even writing those words felt like a step forward, a small victory in reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost. Life moved on, as it always does. The gossip in the neighborhood eventually died down, replaced by new stories and scandals. But for me, something had changed. I no longer felt like a prisoner of my own fears. I began to explore new hobbies, meet new people, and even entertain the idea of opening my heart again. Anthony had been right. Some things are worth the risk. And while our story had ended, it had taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life. It's never too late to choose yourself, to embrace love, and to take a chance on happiness. If you were in Judith's position, what would you have done? Would you risk it all for a chance at happiness, or let fear dictate your choices? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that explore love, passion, and the unexpected turns life can take. You won't believe what's coming next.